Lawyers, what happened during your case that made international news? I was locking up my office at midnight when I heard footsteps running behind me. I turned around. A pregnant woman was sprinting toward me, huge stomach, crying hard. She looked like she was about to collapse. Please. She grabbed my arm. Please, you're a lawyer, right? I saw the sign. I need help. Ma'am, it's midnight. Call my office tomorrow. My trial is tomorrow morning, she was sobbing. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. They want me to go to prison. They'll take my baby away forever. I stopped. What's the charge? Armed robbery. I stole baby formula and diapers from a store. I'm homeless. I had a gun. I was desperate. She could barely breathe. My public defender says I should plead guilty. 3 years in prison. But if I go to prison, I will lose my baby. He's the only thing I have to live for. I looked at her stomach, then at my watch. The trial was in 9 hours. What's your name? Nadia Reeves. Come inside. We need to talk. We spent all night in my office where Nadia told me everything. I read her case file and saw the security footage showing everything. This looked like a certain loss, but I couldn't just let a pregnant woman lose her child. I'll represent you. Trial starts at 9 a.m. Get some sleep. The next morning, we walked into the courthouse together. Nadia could barely walk. Her stomach was huge. She looked terrified. The prosecutor saw us coming and smiled like he'd already won. The trial started. The prosecutor played the security footage first. Clear as day. Nadia pointing a loaded gun at the store clerk's face, taking money and baby supplies. The jury watched in silence, already deciding she was guilty. Then the store clerk testified. He was shaking. She put the gun against my forehead, right here. He pointed. She said, "Give me everything or I'll shoot." I thought she was going to kill me. I stood up fast. Your Honor, my client was desperate. She was homeless and pregnant. The prosecutor cut me off. Motive doesn't matter, Your Honor. A crime is a crime. Judge Brenner agreed. Overruled. Sit down, counselor. I tried again. I wanted to show the jury the full extent of Nadia's situation. How she had no money. How she was living in her car. How they would have done the same in her shoes. But the prosecutor stood up. He was smirking now. Desperation doesn't excuse armed robbery, Your Honor. If it did, we'd have to let half the criminals in this city go free. 3 jurors nodded. I was losing. Then the prosecutor dropped his bomb. He showed Nadia's internet history. 3 days before the robbery, she'd searched pawn shops, store hours, how much baby items sell for. This proves she planned it, the prosecutor said. This wasn't desperation. This was a calculated crime. I jumped up. She was trying to find ways to get money for her baby. The prosecutor looked at me without blinking. Planning a crime while pregnant doesn't make it less of a crime. I looked at Nadia, who was clutching her belly, wincing in pain, like she knew something was coming. I tried calling an expert witness, Dr. Kalman. She studies poverty and homeless mothers. She explained how Nadia's situation left her with no other options, but the prosecutor destroyed her on cross-examination. Dr. Kalman, was what Nadia did a crime? Yes or no? Yes, but yes or no? Yes. Thank you. That's all. He looked at the jury. Don't let emotion cloud the facts. The jury went to decide. They came back in 20 minutes. That's the fastest I'd ever seen. Nadia was doubled over in pain next to me. She knew we'd lost. Judge Brenner walked in. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. The judge opened the paper. In the case of the People versus Nadia Reeves, we find the defendant. Nadia suddenly screamed. She grabbed her stomach and fell backward. Her chair crashed to the floor. I'm giving birth, she screamed. The prosecutor jumped up. Your Honor! She's faking it. She's trying to manipulate the jury. But Nadia's water had already exploded everywhere, gallons all over the floor. She was crying and gasping. The prosecutor went completely still. All the color drained from his face. Get an ambulance! Judge Brenner screamed. Paramedics burst in 10 minutes later while I held her hand. They loaded Nadia onto a stretcher. She was screaming now, in pain, terrified. She grabbed my jacket. You're the only one who showed me kindness. Please don't leave me. I climbed into the ambulance with her. I'm not leaving you. The doors slammed shut, sirens blaring. We raced toward the hospital. Nadia was squeezing my hand so hard I thought my bones would break. She was having contractions every minute. I'm scared, she cried. What happens to my baby? We're getting you help. Just breathe. I coached her using techniques I'd learned from my wife's delivery. We pulled up to the emergency entrance. I started helping the paramedics rush her inside. That's when I saw them, the prosecutor, and 6 federal agents in suits, right behind us. Stop! The lead agent cut in front of us and blocked the hospital doors. Nadia Reeves needs to be handcuffed to the bed before she gives birth. She's a convicted felon. Are you heartless or just stupid? I yelled, tried to shove past him. The 6 agents instantly grabbed my shoulders and held me back. The prosecutor stepped forward. She's getting cuffed to the bed. And when she gives birth, we're taking that baby and sending her to prison. I looked back at Nadia on the stretcher, crying in pain and frustration. I yanked my shoulders free from the agent's grip and shoved past the lead agent's outstretched arm. I planted myself directly between him and Nadia's stretcher. My voice dropped low and steady. If he touched my client before I reached Judge Brenner, I would personally have his badge reviewed for interfering with emergency medical care. The agent's hand moved toward his radio. He hesitated. The paramedics started rolling Nadia toward the doors anyway. Everyone had to move or get run over. The agents scattered to the sides. The prosecutor jumped back. We pushed through the automatic doors into the emergency entrance. Hospital staff swarmed around Nadia's stretcher instantly. Nurses checked her vital signs. A doctor asked rapid questions about her contractions. How far apart? How long? When did her water break? Nadia could barely answer through the pain. I pulled out my phone and speed-dialed Judge Brenner's emergency line. My hands were shaking. The prosecutor followed us inside with his phone already out. He was clearly calling his own people for backup. The 6 federal agents formed a wall near the automatic doors. They positioned themselves like they were guarding a maximum security prisoner instead of a woman in active labor. Judge Brenner answered on the 4th ring. His voice sounded tired and annoyed. It was past midnight. I explained fast. My client went into active labor before the verdict was read. Federal agents were demanding she be shackled to the hospital bed during delivery. His tone changed immediately. It got sharp and focused. He told me he was issuing a verbal order right now. No restraints were to be used until he could hold an emergency hearing in the morning. He wanted the prosecutor on the line in 60 seconds to confirm he heard it. A nurse started rushing Nadia through double doors toward the labor and delivery unit. I had to jog to keep up. I was still on the phone with Judge Brenner. I hit the speaker button so the prosecutor could hear. The prosecutor's jaw was tight. He acknowledged the judge's temporary order, but he immediately started arguing. Nadia was a flight risk. She needed some form of custody supervision even during labor. Judge Brenner cut him off. Medical emergency took priority. We could discuss supervision after the baby was born safely. The call ended. We reached a triage room. A doctor was already inside waiting. She introduced herself as Dr. Beckwith. She immediately began checking Nadia. Nadia was crying and gripping the bed rails through another bad contraction. Dr. Beckwith looked up at the crowd filling her doorway. Lawyers and agents packed the entrance. She stated firmly that only one support person could stay. Everyone else needed to wait in the family area. Nobody was discussing custody or criminal charges in her labor and delivery unit while her patient was in active labor. The prosecutor tried to argue. He needed to maintain chain of custody. Dr. Beckwith cut him off with the kind of voice that came from delivering babies for 20 years. Her patient's medical safety was the only custody she cared about right now. I stayed in the room as Nadia's attorney and support person. Hospital security firmly walked everyone else to a waiting area. I could see the agents through the window. They positioned themselves outside the unit entrance like guards. Dr. Beckwith checked Nadia's progress. Contractions were coming every 3 minutes now. The baby was coming fast, probably within the next few hours. That meant we had almost no time to handle the legal nightmare waiting outside those doors. I pulled out my phone and started texting. Jude Adkins was a colleague who handled family law and emergency custody cases. I needed backup the moment this baby was born. Child Protective Services would get involved immediately. Between contractions, Nadia grabbed my hand hard. She asked what was going to happen to her baby. Her eyes looked wild. The fear in them cut deeper than any physical pain she was feeling. I told her honestly, I didn't know yet, but I was going to fight hard to keep them together. I already had people working on emergency motions to prevent immediate separation. My phone buzzed. Jude texted back within minutes. He was awake now, already drafting an emergency writ to block any attempt to remove the baby without a proper custody hearing. He was also reaching out to a program director he knows, someone who runs a home for mothers in legal trouble. His quick response steadied me. I focused back on Nadia. She needed someone to breathe with her through the next contraction, not someone panicking about legal strategy. Dr. Beckwith finished her exam. She announced that Nadia was moving faster than expected. Then she turned to me and spoke quietly. She had seen cases like this before. Cases where the system tried to separate mothers and newborns right away. She wanted me to know something. She would write whatever medical orders were needed to protect the health of both her patients. Her unexpected support gave me the first real hope I had felt since we left the courthouse. I thanked her. Nadia squeezed my hand hard enough to leave marks. A nurse pushed through the door looking worried. She said there were federal agents outside demanding to speak with Dr. Beckwith about security protocols for the prisoner. Dr. Beckwith's face went hard in a way that made me glad she was fighting for us instead of against us. She walked straight into the hallway, and I heard her voice carry back through the open door. She was explaining in exact medical terms that shackling a woman during active labor increased risks of injury to both mother and baby. She said it violated every standard of care for pregnant patients. Her voice got sharper when she added that if anyone tried to override her medical judgment, she would document it as patient endangerment in the official hospital records. I heard one of the agents try to interrupt, but Dr. Beckwith cut him off. She told them her patient's safety was her only concern right now, and they could either wait in the family area or leave the hospital entirely. Nadia was breathing hard through another contraction. She looked at me with scared eyes and asked if they were going to put chains on her. I told her no. Dr. Beckwith wasn't allowing it. The contraction passed and Nadia relaxed slightly against the pillows. Then the prosecutor appeared in the doorway. He looked frustrated and tired. He said we needed to discuss custody arrangements now before the baby was born, because CPS would need to be notified and present for the delivery. I stood up fast and walked into the hallway to keep the argument away from Nadia. I told him we could coordinate with CPS, but any discussion about removing a newborn from its mother needed to wait for proper legal process. This wasn't the place to make those decisions. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. He said Nadia was about to be a convicted felon facing prison time. The state had an obligation to protect the child from an unstable situation. I felt anger flash through me but kept my voice level. I told him she hadn't been convicted of anything yet because the verdict was never actually read. That meant legally she was still presumed innocent until a judge entered the verdict. The prosecutor's expression changed slightly. His eyes narrowed like he was running through the legal procedure in his head. He realized I was right about the technical status. The jury had reached a verdict, but Judge Brenner never officially entered it into the record before Nadia went into labor. He stepped back and pulled out his phone. He said he needed to make a call. I ducked back into the room to check on Nadia. She was gripping the bed rails through another contraction. Dr. Beckwith was monitoring the baby's heartbeat on the screen. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Jude calling. I stepped back into the hallway and answered. Jude told me he had just filed an emergency motion with family court requesting a hearing before any custody decisions were made. He said he also confirmed that someone named Clementina Rutledge, who runs a mother and baby residential program, had a bed available. If we could convince a judge to allow supervised custody instead of foster placement, we had a real option. I felt hope rise in my chest, but I knew we were still facing a huge battle. The system almost always defaults to separation in cases involving mothers who might go to prison. Jude said he was working on getting all the program documentation together for the hearing. I thanked him and told him to keep pushing. When I walked back into the room, I saw Nadia's face had gone pale. Dr. Beckwith was calling for additional staff over the intercom. She said Nadia was bleeding more heavily than normal. Sometimes stress caused complications during labor. 2 more nurses rushed in with monitoring equipment. They started attaching additional sensors to Nadia's stomach. I moved to stand by Nadia's head. I coached her breathing the way I learned when my wife gave birth to our daughter. I tried to project calm, even though inside I was terrified we were going to lose both the legal battle and face a medical emergency at the same time. Nadia squeezed my hand and asked if something was wrong with her baby. Dr. Beckwith told her the baby's heartbeat was still strong, but they needed to watch her closely. The next 20 minutes felt endless. Nurses moved around checking monitors and adjusting equipment. Dr. Beckwith stayed focused on the screens showing vital signs. The bleeding started to slow down gradually. Finally, doctor. Beckwith looked up and said it was stabilizing. She pulled me aside near the door and spoke quietly. She said Nadia's stress levels were dangerous for both her and the baby. She was going to recommend a 48-hour hospital hold after delivery, regardless of any legal issues. Her patient needed medical observation. This gave us a small window of time before any custody transfer could happen. I immediately texted Jude to factor that into our emergency motion strategy. A woman in business casual clothes appeared at the door. She had a badge clipped to her belt and a folder under her arm. She introduced herself as Lila Parker from Child Protective Services. She was professional, but her voice was firm when she explained that her agency's policy required newborns to be placed in foster care when mothers were facing immediate prison time. I invited her into a small consultation room down the hall. I didn't want this conversation happening in front of Nadia. Once we were alone, I laid out our alternative plan. I told her about the supervised residential placement program. I explained that separation causes real trauma to newborns and mothers. Research showed it. The state should avoid that trauma when safe alternatives existed. Lila sat down and listened carefully. She admitted she had seen the research about mother and infant bonding. She knew separation trauma was real, but she was also bound by agency policies that put safety and stability first. I showed her the information Jude had sent me about Clementina's program. It included 24-hour supervision, random drug testing, GPS monitoring for all residents, strict compliance requirements with immediate consequences for violations. I argued this provided safety without the trauma of tearing a mother and newborn apart. Lila asked detailed questions about the program's track record. She wanted to know about security measures. What happened if Nadia violated any terms? How quickly could they intervene if problems came up? I answered honestly. The program was tough. Immediate consequences for anyone who didn't comply. But it had a strong success rate for mothers who really committed to following the rules. Lila said she would need to speak with her supervisor and review all the program details. But she wasn't automatically opposed to alternatives if they met safety standards and the court approved the arrangement. I felt a small bit of relief. At least she was willing to consider it instead of just demanding immediate separation. We walked back toward the labor room together. When I pushed through the door, I saw Nadia was in obvious pain. Dr. Beckwith said she was approaching transition, the most intense part of labor. Nadia's face was covered in sweat. Her hands gripped the bed rails so hard her knuckles were white. But when she saw me come back in, she looked up. Her voice came out in gasps between contractions. She asked if they were going to take her baby away. I knelt down beside the bed so I was at her eye level. I told her CPS was here, but we were fighting hard for a plan that kept them together. Right now, she needed to focus on one thing, delivering a healthy baby. That was the most important thing she could do for her child. Everything else we would handle as it came. Nadia nodded and closed her eyes. Another contraction hit and she cried out. I stayed right there holding her hand while Dr. Beckwith coached her through the pushing. My phone started vibrating in my pocket right then. I pulled it out and saw an unknown number. I stepped back from the bed and answered. A woman's voice said she was calling from Judge Brenner's chambers. The judge was setting up an emergency phone hearing in 30 minutes. All parties needed to be on the line to discuss custody arrangements before the baby was born. I looked at Nadia, who was gripping the bed rails through another contraction. I told the clerk I understood and ended the call. I walked out into the hallway where the prosecutor was pacing near the nurse's station. I told him about the hearing. He nodded and pulled out his own phone to call his office. Jude texted me right then saying he was already coordinating with Lila from CPS to make sure everyone could conference in. I walked further down the hall to a quiet corner and called him back. He answered immediately and said he had all the documentation ready about Nadia's attempts to get help before the robbery. He would present it during the hearing. I asked if Clementina from the residential program could join the call too. He said he already contacted her and she agreed to participate. We confirmed the dial and number and time. I hung up and went back toward the labor room. The prosecutor stopped me in the hallway. He asked if we could agree on basic facts before the hearing started. I told him we could agree that Nadia committed the robbery, but we strongly disagreed about what should happen to her baby. He looked uncomfortable but nodded. We both knew this hearing was going to decide everything. I pushed back through the door into Nadia's room. Dr. Beckwith was positioned at the end of the bed now. She looked up at me and said Nadia was fully dilated. The baby was coming soon, maybe within the hour. Nadia's face was red and covered in sweat. She was breathing hard between contractions. Another one hit, and Dr. Beckwith told her to push. Nadia grabbed the bed rails and pushed with everything she had. Her scream filled the room. I moved to her side and took her hand again. She squeezed so hard I felt my bones grinding together. The contraction ended and she fell back against the pillows, gasping. She looked at me with exhausted eyes. I told her about the emergency hearing. I said I needed to be on the phone in about 20 minutes to fight for her baby's custody. She nodded, and another contraction started building. Dr. Beckwith coached her through the pushing again. When it ended, Nadia looked at me and said something that almost broke me. She told me to go. She said she could do this part without me. She needed me to fight for her baby because that was more important than holding her hand right now. The trust in her eyes, despite everything she had been through, cut straight through me. I squeezed her hand one more time and told her I would be right down the hall. I promised I would come back the second the hearing ended. She nodded and closed her eyes as another contraction started. I walked out and found the small consultation room Jude had mentioned earlier. It was just a few doors down from the labor room. I could still hear Nadia's cries through the walls. I sat down at the small table and pulled out my phone. I dialed the conference number the clerk had given me. The line connected and I heard Judge Brenner's voice already on the call. He sounded wide awake despite the early hour. He said we were convening this emergency hearing to address the immediate custody question, given that the baby would be born very soon. He asked who was on the line. I identified myself as Nadia's attorney. The prosecutor joined and stated his name and office. Jude came on and introduced himself as co-counsel. Lila from CPS joined next. The judge asked where my client was, and I explained she was currently in active labor down the hall and unable to participate. He accepted that and said we would proceed without her given the urgent circumstances. The prosecutor started talking immediately. He laid out his position that Nadia was facing certain conviction for armed robbery. The jury had been about to read a guilty verdict when she went into labor. She would be going to prison. The baby needed immediate protective custody. He argued that allowing her to bond with the child only to separate them later would cause more trauma than removing the baby right after birth. I jumped in before he could continue. I told Judge Brenner that technically no verdict had been entered because the jury never finished reading it. Legally, Nadia was still presumed innocent. I also said we had a viable alternative to immediate separation. A supervised residential placement that could keep mother and baby together safely. I explained that forced separation causes documented harm to newborns and mothers. Research showed it. We could avoid that trauma while still ensuring safety and accountability. Lila spoke up next. Her voice was measured and professional. She said CPS had concerns about Nadia's criminal case and her circumstances. But she acknowledged that the residential program could provide adequate supervision if the court ordered strict compliance monitoring. Her agency could maintain oversight with unannounced visits at any time. She said separation was always a last resort, and if safety could be achieved through supervision, that was preferable. Judge Brenner asked her pointed questions. He wanted to know about the program's security measures. What would happen if Nadia tried to leave or abscond? How quickly could CPS intervene if problems came up? Lila answered each question carefully. She said the program had 24-hour staff presence and GPS monitoring of all residents. Any violation would trigger immediate alerts. CPS could be on site within minutes if needed. She said her agency would need to approve the specific program and review all safety protocols before agreeing to this arrangement. But she was open to it as an option if the court approved. Judge Brenner asked about the program's track record. Lila said she would need to review their data, but preliminary information showed good outcomes for mothers who committed to following the rules. Jude spoke up then. He said he had documentation to share that was relevant to the custody decision. He started reading from the records he had gathered. 3 weeks before the robbery, Nadia had applied to a homeless shelter for pregnant women. She was put on a waiting list. The shelter was full. 2 weeks before the robbery, she tried to get emergency food assistance. Her application was denied because she was missing paperwork about her residency status. 10 days before the robbery, she called a crisis pregnancy center that advertised help for mothers in need. She left 2 messages. They never called her back. 5 days before the robbery, she went to a community health clinic asking about prenatal care and resources. They gave her a list of phone numbers, but no immediate assistance. Jude explained that this evidence showed Nadia had tried to access help through proper channels before resorting to crime. She didn't just wake up one day and decide to rob a store. She was desperate, and every legitimate avenue had failed her. This context was important for understanding her motivation and her likelihood of being a good mother if given support. The tone of the conversation shifted slightly after Jude presented this information. Even through the phone, I could sense people reconsidering their positions. The prosecutor came back on. He acknowledged the evidence Jude presented. He said it provided helpful context, but he argued it didn't change the fundamental facts. Nadia had committed armed robbery with a loaded gun. She pointed that weapon at another human being's face and threatened to kill him. The store clerk was genuinely scared for his life. He suffered real trauma from that experience. The prosecutor said accountability was necessary regardless of Nadia's circumstances. Judge Brenner spoke up then. He said he agreed that accountability was important, but the question before him right now wasn't what punishment Nadia deserved for her crime. That would be decided in the criminal case. Right now, he needed to determine what served the best interests of the child who was about to be born. Those were 2 separate questions. He asked the prosecutor directly whether removing a newborn from its mother immediately after birth truly served the child's interests, or whether it was really about punishing the mother. The prosecutor was quiet for a moment. Then he said his office's position was that children need stable environments, and mothers facing prison cannot provide that. Judge Brenner said that was a fair point, but didn't answer his question about immediate separation versus supervised placement. A new voice joined the call. Clementina introduced herself as the director of the residential program. She thanked the judge for allowing her to participate. She started describing how her program worked. She explained that mothers lived in supervised apartments within a secure facility. There was 24-hour staff presence on site. All residents had to attend mandatory counseling sessions twice a week. They took parenting classes 3 times a week. They participated in group therapy. They received job training assistance to help them prepare for independence. Every resident wore a GPS ankle monitor that tracked their location at all times. Staff could conduct random home visits without warning. Any violation of the rules resulted in immediate consequences, up to and including removal from the program. Clementina said she had reviewed Nadia's case file that Jude sent her. She was willing to accept Nadia into the program immediately after hospital discharge if the court approved. But she wanted to be clear this was a chance to prove herself, not a guarantee of keeping custody. Nadia would need to demonstrate full compliance with every requirement. Any failure would result in the baby being removed. Clementina said her program had a strong success rate, but only for mothers who were truly committed to following the structure. The prosecutor spoke again. He raised concerns about costs. He asked who would pay for this program. Taxpayers shouldn't have to fund housing for criminals. Clementina responded calmly. She explained that her facility was funded through a combination of private grants and sliding scale fees based on ability to pay. Mothers who had income paid a portion. Mothers who had nothing paid nothing. Nadia would qualify for the no-cost tier given her current circumstances. The program didn't rely on taxpayer funding. Judge Brenner asked whether the program could accommodate a mother who might be facing additional court dates and legal obligations. Clementina confirmed they worked with the court system regularly. Residents often had probation requirements or ongoing legal cases. The program ensured compliance with all legal obligations. Transportation to court dates was provided. Staff attended hearings when needed. She said the structure was designed to support mothers in getting their lives together while meeting all their legal responsibilities. Through the consultation room wall, I suddenly heard a sound that made my whole body freeze. A baby crying, high-pitched and strong. My heart stopped for a second before my brain caught up. Nadia had just given birth. Right then, while I was on this phone call, Dr. Beckwith's voice carried down the hallway saying it was a boy. The weight of this hearing crashed down on me all over again. We weren't talking about hypothetical situations anymore. There was a real child who had just entered the world. A real baby boy who needed his mother. The crying continued, and I realized everyone on the phone call could hear it too. The line went completely silent for a moment. Judge Brenner spoke, and his voice was different now. Quieter, more serious. He said he could hear that the baby had been born. He paused for another few seconds. Then he said he was going to issue a temporary order right now. The baby would remain with Nadia in the hospital under the 48-hour medical hold that Dr. Beckwith had recommended. CPS would be present for monitoring during that time. He was scheduling a full hearing with all parties present in his courtroom in 36 hours. At that hearing, he would make a final determination about custody. He wanted detailed proposals from everyone about supervision plans, safety measures, and contingency plans if problems arose. He told the prosecutor to coordinate with CPS. He told me and Jude to work with Clementina on a comprehensive placement plan. He said everyone should be prepared to present their best arguments in 36 hours because he would be making a decision that would affect this child's entire life. The judge warned us that he expected professionalism and thorough preparation. Then he ended the call. I hung up and ran down the hallway toward Nadia's room. My legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each, but I kept moving. Through the door window, I could see her propped up in the hospital bed holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blue blankets against her chest. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling down at the baby with this look I'd never seen on anyone before. Pure love mixed with complete terror. Dr. Beckwith stood at the foot of the bed writing notes on a clipboard. She glanced up when I pushed through the door and raised her eyebrows in a silent question. I gave her a small nod and mouthed the words, 36 hours, while pointing at my watch. She nodded back and returned to her notes. Nadia looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Her hair was stuck to her forehead with sweat, and she looked like she'd just run a marathon. But she was cradling her son like he was made of glass. The baby made these tiny squeaking sounds and moved his little fists around. I walked over and looked down at his wrinkled red face. He was so small, maybe 6 pounds. His eyes were closed and his mouth kept opening and closing like he was trying to figure out what to do with it. Nadia touched his cheek with one finger, and fresh tears rolled down her face. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. What was there to say? We'd bought her some time, but the fight was just starting. A woman in navy blue pants and a white blouse appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet and a messenger bag. She had short brown hair and glasses and looked to be in her 40s. She knocked softly on the doorframe even though it was already open. Lila Parker from CPS. She'd been on the phone call with Judge Brenner. She stepped into the room and introduced herself to Nadia in a calm, gentle voice. She explained that she needed to do an initial check to see how things were going. Nadia nodded and held her baby a little tighter. Lila pulled a chair over and sat down next to the bed. She started asking questions about feeding plans and where Nadia thought she would sleep and who could help her with the baby. Her tone wasn't mean or accusing, just matter of fact, like she was trying to gather information. I stood against the wall and kept my mouth shut. This was Nadia's chance to speak for herself. Nadia answered each question clearly. She said she wanted to try nursing. She said she knew babies needed to sleep on their backs. She said she didn't have family, but she was hoping the program Clementina ran would teach her what she needed to know. While they talked, the baby started making fussy sounds. Nadia shifted him in her arms without anyone telling her to and supported his head with her hand. She brought him up to her shoulder and patted his back gently. The movement looked natural, like she'd been doing it her whole life even though this was her first time holding a baby. Lila watched all of this and typed notes on her tablet. She asked if she could observe Nadia trying to nurse, and Nadia said yes. Dr. Beckwith came back over and helped Nadia position the baby. It took a few tries, but eventually the baby latched on and started eating. Nadia winced at first, but then relaxed. Lila watched for a few minutes and typed more notes. She told Nadia she was doing well and that she'd be checking in regularly over the next day and a half. The prosecutor appeared in the doorway right as Lila was packing up her tablet. He looked uncomfortable. His tie was loose and his suit jacket was wrinkled. He'd been up all night too. He caught my eye and tilted his head toward the hallway. I told Nadia I'd be right back and followed him out. We walked a few feet down the hall away from the room. He rubbed his face with both hands and let out a long breath. Then he said his office was getting calls. People had heard about the case. About a woman giving birth in the middle of her trial. About a newborn baby who might be taken away. The optics were bad. Really bad. His boss wanted to know if there was a way to handle this that didn't involve ripping a baby from his mother's arms on camera. I crossed my arms and waited for him to get to the point. He said they were open to discussing a plea deal. Something that would resolve the criminal case without the worst outcome for everyone involved. I felt a tiny bit of hope crack through my exhaustion, but I kept my voice flat when I responded. I told him I was listening, but any deal had to include a path for Nadia to keep her baby. She'd already lost everything else. Her home, her dignity, her freedom. If we took her child too, she'd have nothing left to live for and no reason to try to turn her life around. He nodded and said he understood. He said he'd need to talk to his supervisors, but he thought there might be room for flexibility, especially with the stuff Jude had found. The evidence that Nadia had tried to get help before she robbed that store. Applications to shelters, calls to crisis centers, documentation that she'd exhausted every legal option before she picked up that gun. The prosecutor said if Nadia was willing to plead guilty and accept responsibility, they might be able to recommend a sentence that didn't include prison time. Probation instead. Strict probation with serious conditions, but probation. I told him to work on a proposal and we'd review it. Then I went back to Nadia's room. Nadia had finished nursing and was holding the baby against her shoulder again. He was making little grunting sounds. Dr. Beckwith had left. It was just the two of us. I sat down in the chair Lila had used and leaned forward with my elbows on my knees. I told Nadia we had 36 hours until the next hearing. I explained that the prosecutor had pulled me aside, that his office was worried about how this looked, that they might be willing to discuss a plea deal. Nadia looked up from her baby with eyes so tired they were almost gray. She asked what a plea would mean. I laid it out as honestly as I could. She'd have to admit she committed the crime. She'd have to accept some form of punishment, probably probation with a lot of conditions, counseling, classes, check-ins, random visits, living at Clementina's program under constant watch. But it might give us more control over what happened than if we let a jury verdict stand, because that verdict was going to be guilty. We both knew it. The question was what came after guilty. I told her a plea deal might be the best shot at keeping her baby. She didn't respond right away. She just looked down at her son's tiny face. His eyes were closed and his mouth was slightly open. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. She said she did commit the crime. She wasn't trying to escape that fact. She'd pointed a gun at another human being and stolen money. That was wrong no matter why she did it. But she couldn't lose her baby. He was the only reason she wanted to keep living, the only good thing she'd ever done. I promised her that whatever decisions we made would put keeping them together first. I told her I'd fight every legal battle that needed fighting to make that happen. Nadia went quiet again. She kept staring at her son like she was trying to memorize every detail of his face, his tiny nose, his little eyebrows, the way his fingers curled into fists. Minutes passed. The only sound was the baby's breathing and the beeping of monitors in other rooms. Then Nadia said she'd take the plea deal if it meant a chance to stay with her baby. Even a small chance was better than the certainty of losing him. She said she knew she'd be watched constantly, that one mistake could cost her everything. But she was willing to try. She'd do whatever they asked, follow every rule, attend every class, show up for every check-in, whatever it took. I told her I'd make sure the deal protected her as much as possible, that we'd fight for terms she could actually meet, that we wouldn't agree to anything designed to set her up for failure. She nodded and kissed the top of her baby's head. Then she asked what she should name him. I smiled for the first time in hours and told her that was completely up to her. She said she'd been thinking about the name Eric. It meant strong and brave. Two things she wanted him to be. Two things she needed to be herself now. Dr. Beckwith came back about an hour later to check on both patients. She took Nadia's blood pressure and temperature. She examined the baby and weighed him. She said they were both doing well considering everything they'd been through. Stable vitals, good recovery. The baby was nursing well and Nadia's bleeding was normal. Then she pulled me aside into the hallway. She told me she was writing detailed medical notes about the importance of keeping mothers and babies together right after birth. The research was clear. Separation caused stress for both of them. It could interfere with nursing, with bonding, with the baby's development. She said she was documenting everything with an eye toward it being used in court. She wanted to make sure if anyone tried to separate them, she'd have medical grounds to argue against it. I thanked her for going beyond just providing medical care, for being an advocate when Nadia needed one. She said she'd seen too many cases where the system made decisions based on policy instead of what was actually best for the child. She wasn't going to let that happen if she could help it. Then she went back to check on another patient. My phone buzzed in my pocket, my wife's name on the screen. I'd been gone all night without much explanation. I stepped into an empty consultation room down the hall and answered. She asked where I was and if I was okay. Her voice had that edge it got when she was trying not to sound worried, but definitely was. I told her I was at the hospital, that the pregnant client I'd mentioned had gone into labor during her trial, that I'd stayed with her through the delivery, that we were now in the middle of a custody fight with CPS and trying to negotiate a plea deal with the prosecutor. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then she asked if I was getting too involved. If I was crossing lines I shouldn't cross. She knew me well enough to know when a case was getting under my skin. I didn't have a good answer. She said she was worried about me taking on too much, about letting my emotions drive my decisions instead of my professional judgment, but her voice was soft when she said it. She knew this case had hit something deep in me. Something related to when she'd had complications during labor with our first kid. How scared we'd both been, how vulnerable new parents felt, how easy it was for everything to go wrong. I admitted I was probably more involved than I should be, that I'd let this case become personal. But I told her I couldn't walk away from a woman who'd asked for help at midnight and was now fighting to keep her newborn baby. I'd made a promise to stay with her and I was going to keep it. My wife sighed. Not angry, just resigned. She said she supported me. She always did, but she reminded me to take care of myself too. that I couldn't help anyone if I burned myself out completely. She told me to eat something, to sleep if I got the chance, to remember that I was human and humans had limits. I promised I'd try. We said we loved each other and hung up. I stood there for a minute staring at the wall. Then I splashed water on my face from the sink in the corner and went back to work. Jude showed up around dawn with a briefcase that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. His shirt was wrinkled and he had bags under his eyes, but his expression was focused, determined. He'd spent the night pulling together everything we'd need for the custody hearing. We found an empty conference room and spread papers across the table. Court documents, program descriptions, research studies, character references. We started building a complete proposal that addressed every concern the judge or CPS might raise. Safety, supervision. What happened if Nadia violated the rules? How the program would coordinate with probation and family court. What kind of monitoring would be in place? Jude had contacted 3 people who'd gone through Clementina's program successfully. Women who'd been in legal trouble and kept their kids while getting their lives together. He had their statements ready. I worked on the legal arguments about why separation would harm the baby, about how supervised custody served the state's interests better than foster placement. We wrote and rewrote, organized and reorganized. By the time the sun came up through the window, we had a proposal that covered everything. Now we just had to hope it was enough. The prosecutor walked into the conference room around 10 in the morning with an older man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as the district supervisor. They sat across from me and Jude at the long table, spreading out files and legal pads like they were setting up camp. The prosecutor started talking about a plea deal, attempted robbery with a firearm enhancement, time served plus probation, residential placement, counseling, money paid back to the store clerk, regular meetings with probation officers and CPS workers checking in constantly. I listened to every word while writing notes, calculating in my head what each condition actually meant for Nadia's chances of keeping her baby. The firearm enhancement part made my stomach twist because I knew exactly what that triggered. Mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. Prison time built into the system no matter what circumstances existed. I put my pen down and looked straight at the supervisor. I told him the firearm enhancement was a problem. A big problem. It would force Judge Brenner to send Nadia to prison even if he wanted to show mercy, and this case wasn't about a violent criminal with a weapon. This was a desperate mother stealing baby supplies while homeless and pregnant. The circumstances mattered. The supervisor leaned back in his chair, thinking. He looked at the prosecutor, then back at me. He said they could drop the enhancement if Nadia agreed to plead guilty to base robbery and accepted 5 years of intensive probation with zero tolerance for any violations. 5 years of living under a microscope. One mistake and she goes to prison, loses her baby forever. But at least it gave her a chance. We spent the next 2 hours going through every single detail of what those probation conditions would actually include. What counted as a violation? What didn't? Jude kept pushing on the practical stuff, making sure normal struggles of being a new mother wouldn't automatically destroy Nadia's life. He brought up scenarios. What if the baby gets sick and she misses a check-in to take him to the emergency room? What if she's late to counseling because the bus broke down? What if she forgets to charge her GPS monitor one night because she's exhausted from being up with a crying newborn? The prosecutor insisted there had to be real consequences or the whole system fell apart. Back and forth. Compromise, adjust, rewrite. By noon, we had something that looked workable on paper, though I knew the reality would be much harder than the words suggested. I stood up and told them I needed to present this to my client. They agreed to wait while I went to Nadia's room. I found her sitting up in the hospital bed with her son sleeping against her chest. She looked up when I came in, and I could see the fear in her eyes before I even started talking. I sat in the chair next to the bed and laid out the entire plea deal. Every term, every condition. I didn't sugarcoat anything. Felony conviction on her record forever. 5 years of probation where one screwed-up decision could end everything. Paying back money to the store clerk even though she had nothing. Living at Clementina's program under constant watch. Staff could walk into her apartment anytime. GPS monitor on her ankle tracking everywhere she went. Random drug tests. Surprise visits from CPS workers. Mandatory classes and counseling sessions. No privacy, no freedom, no room for mistakes. She listened without interrupting, just stroking her baby's tiny back while I talked. When I finished, she asked one question. Did this deal mean she got to keep her baby? I told her the truth. Nothing was guaranteed. Family court made the final custody call, but this plea removed the immediate threat of prison and gave her the chance to prove herself as a mother while being supervised. It was a chance, not a promise. She nodded slowly, still looking at her son's face. She said she would take the deal. Even a chance to stay with him was better than the certainty of losing him if she went to prison. We walked back to the conference room together, me pushing her wheelchair while she held her sleeping baby. Everyone stood when we entered. Nadia formally accepted the plea agreement. The prosecutor confirmed that his office would recommend this sentence to Judge Brenner and support the supervised custody plan in family court. I was surprised by how cooperative he was being, but I think seeing the newborn baby made everyone want to find a solution that didn't involve tearing a mother and child apart. That afternoon, we set up a video conference from Nadia's hospital room. I positioned a laptop on the rolling table while Nadia sat propped up in bed holding her son. Judge Brenner appeared on the screen from his chambers, looking serious. He reviewed the plea agreement carefully, reading through each page while we waited in silence. Then he looked directly at Nadia through the camera and asked if she understood what she was agreeing to. He asked if anyone had forced her or threatened her into accepting this deal. Nadia spoke clearly despite looking exhausted. She said she understood all the terms. She was accepting responsibility for what she did. She was agreeing to the plea because she wanted the chance to be a mother to her son. Judge Brenner stared at her through the video screen for what felt like forever. Then he said he would accept the plea, but he was also ordering a pre-sentencing report. He wanted detailed information about the residential program before final sentencing happened. The family court hearing started right after. Judge Conway appeared on screen from his chambers, a different judge with a different focus. Lila presented CPS's evaluation. She explained that while significant concerns existed about Nadia's situation, the residential program offered enough supervision. Her agency was willing to support a trial period of supervised custody with strict monitoring. Then Clementina joined the video call and started describing her program's daily structure. Mandatory parenting classes every morning, individual counseling twice a week, group therapy sessions, job training help, staff watching everything 24 hours a day. She explained that mothers lived in small apartments inside the facility, but staff could enter any time for welfare checks. Every resident wore a GPS monitor that sent alerts if they left approved areas. The structure was rigid, the supervision was intense, but it kept mothers and babies together while ensuring safety. Judge Conway leaned closer to his camera, and his expression turned serious. He asked what happens if Nadia breaks the program rules or if CPS decides the baby is unsafe. Clementina explained that staff can remove the child immediately if safety gets compromised. She said law enforcement helps if needed. The judge nodded slowly, and then looked directly at Nadia through the video screen. He asked if she understood this was her only chance. He asked if she knew that any violations would mean losing custody. His voice was firm, but not mean. Nadia pulled her son tighter against her chest. She looked straight into the laptop camera and her voice cracked when she spoke. She said she understood completely. She promised to follow every single rule and requirement. She said her baby was the only thing that mattered to her now. Tears rolled down her face, but she kept looking at the judge. I watched Judge Conway's face soften just a little bit. He saw how much she loved her child. The judge said he needed 15 minutes to think about his decision. The video screen went blank and we all sat in silence. Nadia was shaking. I put my hand on her shoulder and told her she did good. The waiting felt like hours, even though it was only 15 minutes. Then Judge Conway's face appeared back on the screen. He said he was issuing a temporary custody order. Nadia could keep her son, but only if she went straight to Clementina's program when the hospital let her go. She had to follow all program rules. She had to do weekly check-ins with CPS. She had to allow surprise home visits anytime. He scheduled another hearing in 60 days to see how things were going. He made it very clear that he could change this order right away if problems came up. The relief hit everyone in the room like a wave, but it was mixed with fear because we all knew Nadia was now living under a microscope. One mistake and she would lose everything. Dr. Beckwith came in after the hearings ended. She checked on Nadia and the baby. Then she pulled me aside and spoke quietly. She said she was proud of what we accomplished. She told me she had seen too many cases where mothers and babies got separated when supervision could have kept them safe together. Her words meant a lot coming from someone who dealt with these situations all the time. That evening, I sat in a chair next to Nadia's hospital bed while she fed her son. We talked about what the next few months would look like. She was scared, but I could see the determination in her eyes. She asked if I would still be her lawyer through the probation period and all the family court reviews. I told her I would be there as long as she needed me, but I also explained gently that the hard work of proving herself would fall on her shoulders. I could only help her if she did her part. She nodded and said she understood. Hospital security wrote up the incident with the federal agents in their official records. The agents finally left after Judge Brenner's orders made it clear they had no power to mess with the custody arrangement. The prosecutor stopped by Nadia's room briefly before he left. He said his office would be watching the situation closely, but he also said he hoped this arrangement worked out. He admitted that nobody wanted to see a newborn separated from his mother if it could be avoided safely. His words surprised me, but I appreciated them. 2 days later, the hospital discharged Nadia. I drove her and her son to Clementina's residential facility. The building was a converted apartment complex in a quiet neighborhood. Security cameras covered every angle. Staff offices took up the entire first floor. Clementina met us at the entrance with a warm smile. But she was also very serious when she took Nadia through orientation. She went over every single rule. She explained all the expectations. She made sure Nadia understood exactly what compliance required. She talked about consequences for breaking rules. She showed Nadia the GPS monitor she would wear on her ankle. She explained the schedule for classes and counseling sessions. Nadia listened carefully to everything and asked questions when she needed to. We took the elevator to the third floor, and walked down a hallway to apartment 3C. Clementina unlocked the door and we stepped inside. The apartment was small but clean. A crib sat in the corner donated by a local church. Basic furniture filled the space, including a couch, a small table, and 2 chairs. The kitchenette had a mini fridge, a microwave, and a 2-burner stove. Cabinets were stocked with basic food items and baby supplies. Nadia stood in the middle of the room holding her son. She looked around slowly, taking it all in. Then she started crying. She was overwhelmed by having a safe place to live after months of being homeless, but she also knew she was watched constantly. One mistake could cost her everything. A few days after Nadia moved into the facility, I got a formal letter from Bar Council. The envelope was thick and official-looking. I opened it at my desk and read through the contents carefully. The letter said my confrontation with the federal agents at the hospital entrance was reviewed. They had concerns about my aggressive behavior toward law enforcement. They suggested I may have crossed boundaries in my advocacy. They were requiring me to take remedial training on professional responsibility. My stomach dropped when I read it. I knew my actions at the hospital had been intense, but I had been protecting my clients' access to emergency medical care. I called Bar Council and scheduled a meeting for the following week. When the day came, I sat across from 2 attorneys in a small conference room. They asked me to explain what happened at the hospital. I told them the whole story honestly. I admitted that I let my emotions drive my actions in that moment. But I also explained the circumstances. I told them about Nadia going into labor, about the agents trying to block her from getting medical care, about my belief that protecting my client's health was more important than perfect professional behavior. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, they looked at each other and had a quiet conversation. Then they told me they were issuing a formal caution. I had to complete ethics training within 60 days. I accepted it as a fair result for how I handled the situation. I knew I had pushed boundaries, but I would do it again to protect a client in crisis. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom for Nadia's formal sentencing hearing. The store clerk walked in wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. He looked nervous. Judge Brenner called him forward to give his victim impact statement. The clerk stood at the podium and started talking about the robbery. He described the fear he felt when Nadia pointed the gun at his forehead, how he thought he was going to die, how he still had nightmares about it weeks later. His hands shook while he spoke, but then his voice changed. He said he was a father too. He had 2 kids at home. He didn't want to see a baby grow up without his mother if there was another way. He said he supported the arrangement that let Nadia keep her son as long as she paid him back and accepted what she did. The prosecutor looked surprised. I saw Judge Brenner nod slightly. Nadia was crying in her seat next to me, holding her baby. Judge Brenner called Nadia to stand. She got up carefully with her son in her arms. The judge looked at her for a long moment. He said she was getting an extraordinary opportunity that most people in her situation never get. Time served plus 5 years of intensive probation. All the conditions we negotiated: residential program, counseling, restitution payments, random drug tests, GPS monitoring. He told her directly that he would review her progress personally at every probation hearing. Any violation would mean immediate jail time. But he also said he hoped she would use this chance to build a better life for herself and her son. Nadia nodded and thanked him. Her voice was barely a whisper. We left the courtroom and I drove her back to the residential facility. The next morning, Nadia started her daily routine at the program. She attended parenting classes from 9 to 11. A teacher showed her how to properly hold the baby during feeding, how to check if his diaper needed changing, how to recognize different types of crying. Nadia took notes in a notebook and asked questions. After lunch, she had individual counseling twice a week with a therapist who specialized in trauma. The other afternoons she spent in her apartment with her son, while staff members walked by and checked in randomly. She was exhausted all the time. The baby woke up every 2 hours at night. She had to clean the apartment daily because inspections happened without warning. She had to attend group therapy sessions with other mothers in the program. But she showed up for everything. She never missed a class or appointment. She was learning how to care for a newborn while also dealing with everything she had been through. 3 weeks after she moved in, Lila showed up at 7 in the morning without calling first. She knocked on the apartment door, and Nadia answered holding her son. Lila walked through every room checking the living conditions. She opened the fridge and cabinets. She looked at the crib and checked the baby's clothes. She sat down and watched Nadia change a diaper and feed the baby. She asked questions about the daily schedule and wrote notes on her tablet. The apartment was clean. The baby looked healthy and well cared for. Nadia was tired but managing everything. Lila documented positive progress in her report, but she reminded Nadia that the scrutiny would continue for months. Any concerns would trigger immediate action. Nadia said she understood. A few days later, Dr. Beckwith scheduled Nadia for a postpartum checkup at the clinic. She examined both mother and baby carefully. The baby had gained weight properly since birth. All his measurements were normal. Nadia's body was recovering well from delivery. Dr. Beckwith watched how Nadia held her son during the exam, how she responded when he cried, how she soothed him naturally. The bond between them was obvious and strong. Dr. Beckwith wrote in her medical notes that keeping them together appeared to be supporting both their health. She told Nadia she was doing a good job and to keep it up. 60 days after the custody order, we all appeared before Judge Conway for the scheduled review hearing. I sat next to Nadia in the courtroom. Lila presented her report first. Full compliance with every requirement. Clean apartment, healthy baby, no violations. Clementina spoke next about Nadia's participation in the program. Perfect attendance, engaged in classes, following all rules. The prosecutor confirmed that restitution payments had started as agreed. Judge Conway looked at Nadia and said he was pleased with her progress, but he made it clear the intensive supervision would continue. He scheduled the next review for 90 days out. All current conditions stayed in place. A few weeks later, the prosecutor showed up at a community roundtable I organized with several advocacy groups. The topic was maternal incarceration and alternative sentencing. About 30 people attended, including social workers, lawyers, and formerly incarcerated mothers. The prosecutor sat in the back at first. But when the discussion started about how the system handles pregnant women and new mothers, he raised his hand. He didn't apologize for prosecuting Nadia's case, but he talked about what he learned from it, how sometimes the standard approach isn't the right answer, how keeping families together when it's safe can serve justice better than automatic separation. We had a good conversation, professional, respectful, even though we had been on opposite sides in court. 3 months after Nadia grabbed my arm outside my office at midnight, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Nadia. A photo appeared on my screen. Her son was smiling for the first time. His little face was bright and happy. The message said, "Thank you for believing in her when nobody else did." I texted back right away. Congratulations on the milestone. But I also reminded her that tomorrow brought another day of check-ins and compliance requirements. The work wasn't over. I sat at my desk for a minute looking at that photo. We kept a mother and baby together when the system was designed to separate them. Sometimes fighting for one person makes all the difference in the world. But I knew the next 3 months would be just as hard as the first 3. Nadia still had years of probation ahead, years of supervision and scrutiny. One mistake could still cost her everything.